Good afternoon, everybody. We'll let everyone join this Zoom call, and we're excited to welcome you to the NextUp Town Hall, focused specifically on youth and local basketball in the wake of COVID. So we've got an amazing panel and conversation. So we're excited for all of you to be with us today and really talking about what return to play looks like under these circumstances and how some of the best organizations around the country are navigating this COVID crisis. So it's neat to see that there's across the country, there are kids that are getting out there playing some form of play beyond their backyard. And I know a lot of organizations are wrestling with the best way to return and a way to do that safely and also deliver the kind of experiences they want for their kids. But after coming to you live from various bedrooms for 8 or 9 weeks, it's neat to now think about us coming on the other side of aspects of this crisis. For today, really the goal for this conversation is to allow the leading basketball programs in the country a chance to hear from some experts from a medical perspective and health and safety perspective, but also how some of the top organizations have navigated this crisis, are thinking about the disruption to their businesses, to their organizations, and then also really thinking about this return to play and how they're navigating all the issues that are connected to it. This is really the start of a conversation. So one is I'll encourage you to go to that Q&A tab on the Zoom call, and if there's questions or topics you want to cover, go ahead and ask that. If you can go and check that, and you can actually upvote that so it signals to us the questions that people are most interested in. I'll also be incorporating some questions that were shared as well. And then after the event, we've got the industry Slack group that we'll share information how to join. And that's an easy place to continue the conversation, to have access to experts and other organizations across sports across the country to get ideas and best practices. And if you don't know what Slack is, this is your chance. It's a free tool that you can leverage for your organization, and one that we highly recommend that we're using. And lastly, I'll also plug the Play Sports Coalition, which is something that LeagueApps has helped stand up. We've had an incredible support. Over 3,500 organizations around the country have joined the first industry coalition for youth sports. And what is incredible about that coalition is it gives us our voice in Washington. So over 29 members of Congress have kind of joined forces on the House to help try to push forward support for youth sports organizations. And there was actually a bill that was introduced on Monday by a member of the House, by Congressman Max Rose, who actually introduced an entire bill to help bring youth sports back. So it's not only about a relief fund for youth sports organizations, but also about making it easier for families to access sports as well. So a lot of good things that are happening on the front. As I think about today's conversation, as we jump in, I'm reminded of why what everyone on this call is about is so important. I was watching the Last Dance, as many of us have, not only reliving kind of my past, but it almost feels like sports. Your adrenaline goes up when you're seeing those highlights again. And there was a great quote from Michael Jordan shared about his parents about why they signed him up for sports to begin with. And they said they signed him up for organized sports, not because it was about the game, but because it was about life, right? That there's so much about life that you learn through playing sports, especially basketball. And I think that's the importance that everyone here has, is that as we think about returning to play, as we think about what normalcy might feel like in this country, what happens on the basketball court is critical to life, not just about wins and losses. I think we're actually going through the world's greatest brand exercise right now. If I had sat with each one of your organizations and I said in January, okay, you're going to have to figure out how to be valuable, but you can't actually play the game on a court, right? You can't literally play the game of basketball, but you still have to be valuable to your families, to kids. What would you do? How would you act? Well, that is what we're figuring out now, but that shows that there's a higher purpose, a higher value to what everyone's about. And as I think about the need to kind of adapt here, I'm reminded of a great quote from John Wooden, who said that things turn out best for people who make the best of the way things turn out, right? Things turn out best for the people who make the best of the way things turn out. And I think that's very true, right? There's going to be a lot of changes to youth sports in the short term and maybe even the long term. But people who can figure out how to make the best of it, who can innovate, I think is absolutely critical, right? The most successful organizations are recognizing that it's not just about getting used to new technology, new tools, new ways of doing it, over a course of years, but literally over a course of weeks. And I think about all the ways, for example, people have mastered basketball drills over Zoom is probably a good example of that. So we're excited to get into this and recognizing that this is an environment of change. The right organizations are going to get through this, and we're excited to be part of that and excited to be part of today's conversation. So I want to start with a conversation and bring in Dr. Daphne Scott to come in. She is a primary care sports medicine doctor at the Hospital for Special Surgery, and HSS does unbelievable work in youth sports. We've been honored to work with them and collaborate with them in lots of different ways. And in particular, Dr. Scott brings a lens of basketball expertise to this having now served as serving as the team physician for the Westchester Knicks, and having worked previously for the New York Liberty. And that's to say nothing of your work for USC, as well as previously being a team physician for USA Track and Field. So you understand sports and you understand health and safety. And so thank you, Dr. Scott, for being with us today. And first of all, and also thank you for doing all you're doing as a doctor at a time like this. And I'd love to pose the first question to you, which is, if I'm sitting in the shoes of basketball organizations around the country, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I think about the return to play? And I got CDC guidelines over here, and I got USOPC guidelines over here, and I got stuff that state and local governments are talking about here. What's the way to distill that and think about actually having basketball be played safely?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. To answer your question, I mean, you're right. There is so much information coming out right now. What I tell people first and foremost is really figuring out what's going on at your local level, okay? Listening to your local health officials, really that's where the decisions are being made on what's going to be allowed to happen. When could you possibly get, your young athletes back into the gym or something similar to that? So I think that is where you first and foremost have to look. But you definitely have to stay up to date with all of the other recommendations. I know that a lot of different groups are putting out things on what are ways you can keep your young athletes engaged and things like that. So I think that's very helpful.
When you think about specifically basketball, and as you think about the context of Westchester Knicks or youth sports organizations, what are some of the best practices you can think of that as organizations are coming together? Is it different kinds of plays, different kinds of practices, certain kinds of health and safety practices? Like, what are some of the ways that you might advise organizations to think about basketball specifically in the way to kind of think about safety and health at this time?
I think the biggest part right now, and everyone keeps hearing it, is social distancing. So I think, when you're thinking about bringing athletes back in, how are you going to be able to keep with the guidelines that are in your area, but still be able to engage them? So, people talk about, if you're thinking about bringing people in, or if they're allowing you to bring them in, what are the ways you can do it? So how are you going to limit the athletes, limit the numbers? How many are you able to have in the gym? How are you going to be able to screen the athletes? Things like that. That's what you have to start thinking about. I think, unfortunately, you can't put the cart before the horse. We can't start thinking about, at this point, games and tournaments and that sort of thing, but it's more or less, how are you going to, get the athletes engaged? And if you're not able to meet with them in person, how are you able to do that over something like Zoom or any other different platforms? Are you able to send them some workouts and things like that?
So one of the things I think you're saying there is that that gameplay and tournament play are going to introduce different kinds of risks. Can you explain why what the risks are associated with that versus as you think about kind of practices?
Yeah, when we think about COVID, we think about, how you transmit it. And the thought is that close contact with someone who may have it, either they're symptomatic or even asymptomatic. So if you're having close contact with them and getting respiratory droplets in, that's going to be a way that you can catch it. So for right now, that's why you're hearing, again, all of this about social distancing. So I'll be perfectly honest, I still think that we're a little ways away from figuring out how do we get people back into playing games, scrimmages, and that sort of thing. I think that's why the NBA is still where it's at, and the fact they're still trying to figure out how do we do it safely, okay? So I think that, there are ways that you can figure out how to do it on a smaller level, so either on an individual level or working with just a couple of athletes, but again, being able to keep them separated, keep them distanced, because we know if people are a lot closer together, that's where the risk is highest.
Yeah. One of the other things about this is around, these organizations are having to deal with parents who have a lot of questions on their mind. And I imagine as a doctor, you're getting all kinds of inquiries about this. So what advice do you have about the way they're communicating to parents around questions around health and safety, and maybe some recommendations around that?
Communication is absolutely key. So I think what, as an organization, one of the best things that you can do is make sure that the parents know, hey, I have been in contact with the local officials. These are what the recommendations are. We are following these to the T. Let them know, again, if you're working to bring kids back into a facility, this is what we're doing. This is how we're cleaning all of the spaces. We're closing this area off because we know that this could be a risk. We're going to be taking, whether or not we're doing a questionnaire to ask about symptoms, whether or not we're going to be checking temperatures, however you decide or however you're kind of recommending recommended by the local authorities. I think letting people know that is going to be key. I know with our patients, when, you know, patients are still worried about coming into the clinic to be seen. And so I tell them, hey, you're going to get asked multiple questions. You're going to get your temperature checked. We're making sure we're socially distancing. I think just being very upfront about what you can do is key.
Is there a difference between outdoor and indoor basketball? Is there a different way that organizations should be thinking about that?
You know, unfortunately, we don't know. We don't have any good science to say that it's safer to play outside versus safer to play inside. I will say, you know, again, at this point, it's still keeping with social distancing. So let's say you have a facility where you have access to 4 different hoops. And again, if it's safe in your area, you could possibly bring in 4 different athletes and keep them distanced apart from each other, making sure you're cleaning and things like that. These are ways that I think people have to get creative once they're allowed to start liberating some of these stay-at-home orders.
Yeah. One of the questions that came in is just around transmission versus via sweat. Is there evidence or is there information around that versus maybe the other ways or mechanisms of transmissions?
Yeah, so we do think that, you know, there may be transmission via sweat. We know there's droplets. We know that we're seeing it in other bodily fluids. So there is some concern for that. Again, you know, you see some of the sports that have already started. You think about UFC, which has already started. And I was not involved with their kind of how they devised any of their medical standards for right now. But I mean, they're testing athletes regularly throughout the time that they're there and on the ground and before they're fighting. So yes, we do think that there's probably some aspect of transmission. You also have to think when you're playing basketball, not even just the sweat, you get going hard, you're breathing hard. We know that loud talking can transmit droplets. So, I mean, all of that.
Okay. One of the last questions I have is around, you know, common injuries. I mean, a lot of youth have been doing things that are different. Now you're bringing them back on the court, and whatever form of play that might be. What are the risks associated with that, and what advice can you provide organizations? One of the things I remember actually did a great event with the Knicks and HSS, and I know you're actively involved with them around the junior Knicks about the kind of best practices around stretching and injury prevention and overuse. And you all have always been a leader in that field at HSS. So I'm curious to know, in this particular situation, you've got this layoff for different kind of activities. What recommendations do you have how organizations can lean in to make sure their kids don't get injured on the return?
Yeah, my biggest thing, and I always say this to my patients, is you can't go from 0 to 60. So if you've had some kids who've been at home and doing absolutely nothing, sitting on the couch playing video games for 2 months, those are going to be kids that I would worry a lot more about coming back and ending up with some sort of overuse injury, because you go from doing nothing to doing a whole lot. So I say you really need to know, what were your young athletes doing in this time off, okay? I think even if you're not quite sure, you know, you can start to get them started in some different exercises, making sure that they're stretching. This is a great time to get that stuff started. I think you have to gradually kind of warm back up into the conditioning and that sort of thing, because the big things that I worry about, and that we always worry about with our basketball athletes, are knee injuries and ankle injuries, okay? I know that my young athletes come in, they usually have really tight hamstrings, so areas that you could be focusing on would be hamstring stretching, and there are a lot of great exercises. I know that we have our HSS Sports Safety Center, different exercises and strengthening regimens that you can do to help decrease the risk of ACL injuries, which are also something that we worry about, especially in a group that's been off and hasn't been working out and are going to go back to a pivoting, jumping, landing kind of a sport. So.
Yeah, one thing I'm reminded actually with what you're saying in the previous conversations I've had, or panels I've done with HSS, is, you know, it was always thought that an organization that took this seriously would ultimately produce better players and healthier players, and ultimately can perform better. And I vividly remember a discussion with someone from HSS and Don Sherwood from USA Basketball, who was talking about that one of the ways to prevent overuse is to do different kinds of drills, different kinds of stretches. I think he was describing even having kids play, having some of the best players on the USA Basketball team play tennis. And by playing tennis or racquetball, you're actually developing rotational kind of strengths, so that for rebounding, it would be like a similar movement. And so it's things like now, especially if we're saying there's a modified form of play as you come back, there's actually an opportunity to lean in on the stretching, on the flexibility, on those things, because parents are still going to appreciate kids getting active. You can start to ingrain the right kind of habits that will make them better athletes and athletes that get injured less. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of great resources from HSS that are part of that. So last couple final rapid fire questions that are coming in before we let you go, because I know you're actually in the office seeing patients. You only get a day a week to do that in New York. Is someone posed the question that is, what if there's a family unit and somebody in that family unit has tested positive? Does that mean that the entire team has to stop? Like, what are best practices? Even forget about what form of play is happening. Someone in your organization is a family member. Like, what is the best practices around how you think about quarantining?
Yeah, so yeah, if someone's had close contact with someone who's tested positive, they will have to quarantine. Again, this is going to go back to the local health department. So if they have not already been notified, they need to be notified. A lot of times they'll do contact tracing, and usually it's a 14-day quarantine. So again, this is why I tell people, you want to make sure you do it right. You want to make sure you're not rushing into things, because it does have consequences. One positive can lead to 14 days of needing to stay away. So
yeah, so going to have those residual effects, and that there's a question, and that's again where a lot of the guidelines are just starting to come out about ways to kind of prevent that. Last question is, especially in some areas where they can start to bring people back for some kind of modified form of events. Is there a difference between single-day events or multi-day events in terms of what you might see as perceived as possible risk there?
That's a really good question. I don't think that we know much about it. I think for right now, again, because we're just learning as we go, I would definitely think that that a single day event would probably be a little bit better than multi-day events. You're just going to lessen your exposure at this point right now. So yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Dr. Scott, I know you've got to go see patients, so thank you for being with us. And again, thank you for all that HSS does. It's the Hospitals for Special Surgery. We'll make sure that in the wrap-up, we'll send out a link to the kind of resource center that you all have, and again, encourage everyone to take advantage of those. And I know some of the other questions that are coming in, we'll pick up with the rest of the conversation. So Dr. Scott, thank you for being here. Brendan, Courtney, and Brandon, come on in. Now, I would have loved to have some like that Michael Jordan music. Was it Europe that plays in that gets people pumped up before the game? But Brandon, you just get me. So we got Brendan Winters from ProSkills, co-founder of ProSkills, and also the co-founder and director at Team Curry that he's partnered up with Steph Curry on. And one of the things is Brandon is famous now because he was just part of the great conference that happened last week with the Junior NBA, where he was part of a roundtable with Rick Carlisle, Doc Rivers, Don Staley, Jay Billis was leading it. I think there's probably a few others, and of course Brandon. So we thank you for gracing us with your presence, and certainly also appreciate the fact that you're part of the Junior NBA Flagship Network, which kind of recognizes a lot of the top basketball programs in the country and all the being partners and all the great work that NBA is doing. So Brandon, thank you for being here. We appreciate that, and I'm going to start with you and then jump into Brandon and Courtney. But give us a little bit of sense of what ProSkills is about, and kind of in terms of scale and reach of what in normal times, kind of the kind of influence that you have as an organization, and maybe briefly how you've tried to adapt to kind of the changing circumstances under COVID.
Yeah, it's obviously been difficult, but we're in 10 cities, stretching all the way from San Francisco, California, Denver, Colorado. I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, and Chattanooga, and Philadelphia and New York would be our northeasternmost cities. So we kind of span across the country, and each city is a little bit different in size. And so yeah, it's been an interesting time over the last couple months trying to deal with all the federal, state, local guidelines and dealing with all our cities.
That's great. Do you and when you think about when you think about the way you've adapted to this, it seems like you were always pretty savvy on social media, but you've leaned in a lot on some things that you could do virtually. Can you give us the kind of 1 minute about some things you've done, and I think we'll kind of explore some of those things later.
Yeah, I mean, when this thing first happened, of course, we quickly went to Instagram live workouts like a lot of people did. We went to the Zoom workouts that were more private for our own kids. But recently, we've kind of stepped it up a notch above that. I think we started doing virtual tournaments, virtual shooting competitions, which we haven't really seen many other folks doing, but have been really, really great. Tons of good feedback on that. We're launching virtual summer camps, and a big announcement we made today was our virtual training platform, which is PSP Plus, kind of a Peloton style training for basketball players.
That's awesome. Brendan, thank you for being here. Courtney, I'm excited to have you here as the program director of the San Diego Bulldogs, based out in beautiful San Diego. And I know you also had an incredibly accomplished career in the WNBA for Atlanta, Chicago, and the Sparks. and played at San Diego State. But before that, do you give us a little bit of sense about what the Bulldogs are about? What kind of program, who you're serving, the kind of reach that you have as a program?
Well, we're about 5 years old now, and we've started from about 10 teams and grown to about 35. And so we're a boys and girls club. We combine our programs and we work together to have a girls side and a boys side. And my co-director is DJ Gay, also played at San Diego State. So little Aztec connection here in San Diego that we started. Oh, yeah. And we've been able to really change the culture of San Diego basketball, make it very competitive. And kind of me and DJ are both from LA. So we wanted to make San Diego basketball more like LA basketball. And so that's what we've been doing. We've been taking these kids down to LA, to Vegas. We take them all over really to face the best competition. And at first it was tough. We were taking our licks, getting whooped on. And now we're really in championship games and open divisions competing with teams from all over. So that's kind of our background in San Diego. And we're just about changing the culture. We're about empowering kids and using basketball as a platform to develop leadership and character.
And do you all do work, if I'm remembering correctly, connected to the Boys and Girls Club? Is it, you have a relationship with them?
We are under the Boys and Girls Club of San Diego. So we're a separate entity of them, but we are Boys and Girls Club of San Diego. So we are one and the same with that organization. And so that's been very helpful for us during this time, having them to guide us through a lot of the phases that are going on and the closure, and then now hopefully getting ready to reopen. They've guided us and they've been a huge part of our being able to be in business still. So Boys and Girls Club San Diego has done a great job of helping us and guide us.
That's awesome. And last but not least, we got Brandon Lafferman, also a Junior NBA flagship network partner, and doing great work out of the Midwest. So I think we're covering the entire country for the most part. I'm from Texas, so I guess I represent that perspective. And one of the things I think you bring some interesting perspective is that the COO there is your facility. You are involved in a lot of tournaments. There are a lot of questions about how you kind of navigate or thinking about that. In addition to being the head boys basketball coach at University High School in Carmel, and went to Butler. And so, appreciate you being here, and maybe give us a little bit of sense of kind of what the empire you've created out in Indiana is about in terms of what the Pacers Athletic Center is doing in Indiana primetime sports.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate having me on. The Pacers Athletic Center it's home to two different pretty large team programs called Primetime Sports and Grand Park Premier. So we've had to obviously navigate how to get our teams back in the building. We run the largest youth basketball league in the Midwest, which is called the Indy Youth Basketball League. And then obviously, like you said, we're home to some major national events, EIBL, basketball, Junior NBA, Under Armour, and then we run a camp business too. So we kind of cover all basketball inside the Pacers Athletic Center. And, in Indiana right now, our phases are moving along to the point where we're hoping to reopen here Sunday in a small capacity. And then over the next 6 weeks, you'll see more things start up as the state reopens. So,
as we jump in with the panel, I think one of the questions I want to start with is just a question of how you've navigated the kind of financial realities. And I know one of the things we were talking about is each of your organizations, some form, have been able to kind of take advantage of some of the PPP funding. So, maybe I'll throw it to you, Brandon, and stay with you, is how have you used PPP? Has that worked for you in terms of kind of keeping your organization around? And what advice do you have for any of the organizations out there if they haven't yet been able to take advantage of some of the financing available?
Sure. So we got on the PPP really quickly. I'll say the best advice I have is your banking relationships are really important. And I'm not a financial management guy. My main job is to create programs and operate the programs. So I'll kind of give a shout out to JP Klein, who does all the financing and money work with us. But him and our ownership, their relationships with the banks allowed us to really get to the front really quickly. And I can also say we work with more local banks, which I think helped us too, versus large national organizations, which I think the lines were a little longer. So advice there would be if we are concerned about something like this happening again, I would get real close to your bankers. I think it's very important in a time like this. In regards to how we used it, it allowed us to keep all of our full-time staff on. We didn't have to furlough anybody that was a full-time employee of the Pacers Athletic Center. It allowed us to keep working from home and keep everybody busy. And we spent that time while we were able to still pay our staff. We just spent our time focusing on a lot of projects to get ahead. And, I'll give a shout out to LeagueApps. One of those things was starting the process of putting our back-end software and our registration system with LeagueApps and getting that going, because it was something that we've always wanted to do. And as I think everybody on this call knows, we're all busy all the time, and there's things that sort of stay on your to-do list and you never really get to them. And that's what we tried to focus our work time on during this time.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we've seen. I think about 60% of organizations have used this period to figure out how to kind of better their organizations, one of which is around infrastructure, technology, coach training, whatever it may be. Courtney, one question I have for you is a lot of organizations are dealing with refunds and questions of how they're dealing with parents right now. So I'm curious, have you navigated questions around refunds or credits, or was that an issue for your organization?
No, I think we were very proactive about that, understanding that when we had tryouts, everything was starting to progress with COVID. And so we were prepared for that before it happened. So we sent an email out, we gave options. Because we're nonprofit, we can't give an option for donations as well. So we had 3 options. We had return credit and donations. And we were fortunate enough that a lot of people did take a credit at the time, thinking that this would only last for 2 weeks to a month. So we've been able to navigate that really well, and obviously staying transparent with parents about what our plans are, and then hopping on Zoom right away, not allowing too much time between when we shut down to when our Zoom session started, really gave parents the peace of mind that they needed to know that regardless of this, since they took credits, even if they took refunds, we're still going to engage the players and keep them active. And so we've been very active on Zoom Monday through Thursday. I think we're almost engaging kids in more basketball now than before we're on the court, just trying to make sure they're getting their hours in, and telling the kids and the parents, if we were getting 3 hours a week in practice with 1 hour of a game, we want to maintain that. We want to get 4 hours of work in a week through Zoom, through film, through chalk talks, through interviews with players. So we've been engaging our players and parents in a lot of Zoom workouts and conversations and interviews. And so parents have been comforted by that, and we haven't had that many people ask for refunds.
That's awesome. And I'm eager to get into a little bit more around the virtual training. But Brandon, I'll bring you in here to the conversation because curious how you have kind of were faced with questions of refunds and credits. And how did you communicate around that? What are some strategies you use?
Yeah, I mean, it's been difficult, to be honest with you. Obviously the first option for us is not a cash refund. It's a credit or some future opportunity. But of course, if someone comes back to us and says they need the money right now, and it's no questions asked, we give it back. But we've definitely been trying to push credits and future events and things like that, because I mean, we're struggling financially right now, just like everyone else. And so we need cash to help pay our people or any bills and things like that. So we're pushing hard on the credits, but if not, we are refunding.
Yeah. And Brandon, from your perspective as a tournament operator, how did that happen? How did you navigate that? And how did you work with some of the teams that are kind of working and signing up for your tournaments?
We've had, a lot of dates obviously canceled. And I think that in a situation like this, your brand is really important, and how you treat your customers, your vendors. Those things they're going to come back around at the end of the day. Right. So I tried to be as fair as we could. And essentially if the governor said we weren't allowed to open and it fell on a date where an event operator had an event planned, the goal was to try to find a new date and push them back a little bit, keep their deposit in place. And that way that, we're still going to get the money and the event will still be able to be run down the road. And then that way their teams can still obviously come. Some of the events we were about to run in late March that were canceled right at the beginning of this, some of those we did have to refund some teams. I think just like the other two, the goal is always to find a credit or a way to keep the people around. And in our team business, I feel pretty good about what we were able to do. We really haven't had to refund a lot of people, but the event side's tough. I mean, they're putting up a lot of money to run an event here. And if we're not allowed to offer them the facility to run that event, you're kind of in a spot.
Yeah. So a couple of things I'll share. There's I just posted in the chat channel some morning consult data. They did a pretty comprehensive parent survey. I thought it was pretty interesting to note there, how parents are pretty empathetic to what organizations are going through. So, a lot of parents have a concern about the viability of their organizations. And what was interesting is more than half were willing to prepay for future seasons to help keep those organizations afloat. And then 16% would actually willing to invest more if it meant a more safe experience. Now, the question is how you translate that. And a lot of that comes down to how you're communicating, what's the value that you're offering. And so we'll talk a little bit about the strategies around that. But one of the things that I think is most important is we did an interesting conversation with a guy named Charlie Hawk. And Charlie Hawk is like a communications expert. He actually has experience in youth sports. He was running a big club at one point in Pennsylvania, but he works with Fortune 500 companies on difficult conversations and sales training. And one of the things that he said that I thought was really interesting was, bad news is not like wine. It doesn't age well, right? So if your programs aren't happening or things aren't happening, or you're like trying to hold on to money, you don't say anything. It's not like what he was saying is people make up the answers for themselves if you're not filling that void. So if you're not communicating, even if you don't have all the answers, if you're not out there being proactive, they're going to fill that gap with their own ideas. Like, oh man, Brendan's not calling me, ProSkill's not calling me. That's because of XYZ. So now I'm making up a scenario that's even worse than maybe what actually is reality. So that idea of being proactive is one part of it. And especially as we're going into this kind of, period of certainly some kind of disrupted programming. It seems like virtual training was one of the strategies you've used to kind of, keep your organizations engaged. So Courtney, you mentioned a range of different tactics. How did it work for you? Like what was most successful when it came to the value you were able to deliver virtually? And I'm curious to know if this is going to be a longer term feature of what you're doing as a program.
Well, really, I came up with ideas, and my coaching staff and I came up with ideas. We went about the week and did, Monday was, ball handling, Tuesday's a hit workout, Wednesday's a chalk talk, Thursday's a guest speaker. And so 2 weeks went by and constantly revisiting what's working, what kids are engaged in, and then just asking the kids, what do you enjoy the most? What do you want to do the most? And so now I'm scheduling our weeks based upon what the kids say they want to do. We want to do 2 hit workouts. Perfect. We'll do hit workouts twice now, 1 ball handling and 1 interview. And really what the kids are enjoying the most is surprising me. They're really enjoying the interviews, bringing special guests on, allowing them to ask questions. And then the hit workouts, which is just, body weight, running in place, push-ups, getting creative as we can with it. And so I think putting it on the kids and the parents to tell us what they would like, because they're our consumer. And so I want the kids to know that we want to do what they want to do. It's not about what we want right now. We just want to support them. And so kind of asking the kids, they gave feedback right away. They had no issues with it. So, we've been doing what the kids have wanted to do, and been constantly bringing on the guest speakers and trying to, find guest speakers that come on. And the kids have really enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, it's neat to think about how you've I imagine, I don't know if you were doing a lot of guest speakers and things like that before, but you've broadened the ability for you to add value to the families. It seems like that's something that you can lean into when it comes to even as you kind of come back and return to play.
Absolutely. That's a conversation that every week when we meet as a coaching staff, I'm telling the coaches, like, we're never going to go back to the way things were before. We're going to continue to use Zoom as a resource. And one thing that Zoom has really helped with is film evaluations. So as a staff, we put together a film evaluation sheet, and we use this sheet to now evaluate film with our players. And it's been great. And it's something where we've always had to take time out of practice to watch film. But now we know we don't need to take practice time away. We can just hop on Zoom once a week with the team and do our film evaluations on Zoom. And now this situation has caused us to create a sheet so that the kids know exactly what to look for. So they can do film evaluations with or without us.
Yeah, one of the things that we've thought about for a while, we did the first industry conference on youth sports called NextUp last November. And one of the key beliefs we articulated was that kids are going to have an increasing role here. If you think about esports or video games, right, or 2K, what esports is about is basically video games combined with youth sports. So it's 2K in the context of leagues and tournaments and events. And kids love it one of the reasons I love it is because they're running things, because parents have no idea what's going on when it comes to video games and esports. So they're able to kind of push ahead, but they're really, it's very interactive. It's responsive. It removes some of the other pressures that they might feel. And so when you think about like training in a virtual environment, like if you can't figure out how to engage kids, if you can't figure out how to design something that they want to be part of, it's one thing to have them on a court, but when they're at home and you're trying to engage them, your threshold is even higher, right? You've got to enlist them and understand what they're looking for. Like my daughter, I was trying to get her to go on this after school activity. She's like, she's almost 5. She's like, nah, I'm good. That wasn't for me. And it's like, okay, like, if she was at school, she's going to the after school activity, but she's at home. I'm trying to navigate things. It's a little bit harder. So I think by figuring out how to engage them and enlist them, you're really tapping into something that I think is a longer term strategy to be really effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being flexible, understanding that with things changing day by day, we have to be ready to change as well. We have to be flexible, and consensus and collaboration is one of the most important parts of leadership. And so showing the kids that is an important skill to have, especially within these times, I think they're learning from us. We are mentors to them. We want to lead by example. And so they are seeing now, okay, this is how you lead. It's not just about what Coach Courtney wants to do. She's invested in what we're interested in. And so it's been great. Actually, it's been really good opportunity to engage with them on a different platform.
Yeah, Brendan, I'm curious. Virtual training is another area you've leaned into. And you always were pretty social media savvy as an organization, technically fluid. What's your sense about what you've learned about virtual training, how to do it well as you translate now into virtual camps and everything else? We'll talk a little bit more about the future, but what have you learned about virtual training to do that well as an organization? And how do you think it's worked? Is it part of your long-term arsenal?
Yeah, it's definitely part of our long-term plan now. But yeah, we've learned a few things. I mean, number one, I think we were kind of surprised at how much the kids like to engage during the workouts, especially like in the chat functionality. It's, sometimes it's like, hey, get back to the drill, because they're typing during the drill, but it's still fun for them. I think just getting to interact with the other kids on the chat, getting to interact with the trainer, and then also the trainer, like you said, has to kind of bring a higher level of energy than maybe they normally would, and almost be a character of themselves or something like that, just to try to get that, pass that energy through the screen. So, and music helps too. So adding some music in, which we normally wouldn't do in person, that helps as well. So I think those 3 things are probably the biggest things we learned. But just like Courtney said, man, we're all in this for the long run. This is going to be an addition when we get back on the court. I think a lot of parents and even some coaches and things think these things are mutually exclusive. Like you can't do the virtual stuff if you're doing in person, or if you're doing in person, you can't do and they work together really well. They complement each other. So that's how we look at it. And we are definitely going to continue with the virtual stuff, even when we're back on the court.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like the idea of esports learning from esports, like this has just accelerated the way to think about that integration of technology into the experience. I am curious, have you done any video game related activities? I know there was a question that came in from Tim Ritter about that. Is that been anything you've experimented with, or how do you think about the correlation between your kids playing 2K and how that might translate into being ball players?
Yeah, we actually created like a pro skills basketball 2K league. The only issue was that it only I think allowed 30 players in the league, so it wasn't enough. But we had our Charlotte director, for instance, created a league and made pro skills uniforms and stuff, and they had a little circuit, which was pretty fun. But eventually, you got to move on, at least in our view, to some more actually like active activities. So.
Good stuff. So Brendan, one thing is I want to turn the attention to kind of thinking about this return to play. And one thing I'll encourage people to do is go to that Q&A tab. If you're listening and you have questions of the panelists, we'll incorporate those in. But you mentioned you're opening on Monday. Is that right? So what is this like? What is basketball going to be like? How are you thinking about, in terms of your facility and programs, like what is your plan, especially in Indiana, which may be obviously a different situation than areas that have been a little bit harder hit?
Sure. Yeah. I think, I'll start out by saying that on Monday, or Sunday, it's actually Sunday evening, our state moves into what's phase 3 of their opening. So we're allowed to have 100 people in a social gathering, up to 100 people. and gyms and workout facilities are allowed to open. So there's another phase that's going to happen 3 weeks later where rec sports leagues are allowed to open. So we're just following along with what the guidelines are. And I want to preface this by somebody in my seat. You know, I am very aware basketball is going to be a complicated thing to do and social distance. There are definitely risks. I think everyone that works here, it's all we've talked about for the last month. Our current plan, which parents and from our program have been very positive about, is that on Sunday, we will begin workouts. And basically we have an 8-court facility. We're allowed up to 100 people in the building. So we will we're spacing our team's practices out where no more than 10 kids and a coach, so 10 people, can be on a court at a time. We're not allowing parents to come inside during this practice window, and this is going to last about 3 weeks where we do this. So there'll be a workout on every court. Kids will only be allowed to stay on that court. Bathrooms, other common areas essentially are going to be limited. So no water fountains. People will have to bring in their own water and have been marked with their names. Restrooms are going to be, we're only going to have a couple stalls open at a time. Only one kid can essentially go in to use them at a time. We're going to have everybody bring in their own basketball from home, and there'll be wipes to wipe them down before and after their practice. Coaches are going to wear gloves and masks to obviously protect them. And then we have a whole screening and waiver process that we're going to go through as well with our program to obviously ensure that nobody sick is coming into the building. One thing I've found, and you talked earlier about communication. We've been communicating like crazy, and I like the statement that you made. If you say nothing, people are going to figure out their own idea. I've found that parents there's been yes, we can't wait. There's been no, we're not ready. And we've been very respectful to both of those. And then there's been the complicated people in the middle, which I think is a lot. And trying to navigate the best way to make those people feel comfortable and ready. I've found that the best thing to do is just be incredibly honest with them and be patient with them. Try not to make them feel pressured. Because this is a situation where every family has to really make up a decision for themselves. And the minute they come in a building, an indoor facility that could have up to 100 people in it, we're going to do everything that we can to keep it clean and safe. But there is a risk. I think everyone knows it. And I've seen some things in the questions and answers about this that, it's basketball. It's a contact sport. So I feel confident about this practice phase, and then the game phase would start a few weeks later.
And the last question I have is, is this something, you have really thought this through. Are there specific guidelines you look to create this? Is this something that you created your own kind of document around? And how are you, how do you actually know it's working, right? It's one thing that for parents to have the kids in the building, but what are the ways that you're also trying to make sure that there's not health implications to anything that's going on?
Well, we've spent the last probably 30 days between me being on calls with the junior NBA groups and reading the CDC guidelines and listening to our governor. Essentially, that's how we've come up with what we feel like are the best practices right now. And I think the word I've used a lot is it's complicated. You hear a lot of different things from different places. And I'm not a medical professional, so I've been doing my best to listen to the medical professionals to figure out what we think will work for basketball. In the end, I think our plan is that it was nice to hear Dr. Scott, because you asked a question that we really hadn't had an answer to, which is what happens if somebody reports back that they're sick? Because, our question has been, does that shut down the whole program? Does that mean we have to shut down the whole facility? If we get into league play and we do have a player somewhere in the league, does that mean every player in the league now has to go home and stay home? And I think that the way that we're doing things in the first 3 weeks, players will only interact with the players on their team. So we're talking about 9 other individuals max and a coach. And we will be completely social distanced from the other players in the facility. They're only coming in twice a week for an hour and a half for a practice. So if someone were to get sick, and we're going to continue these screening questionnaires every week before practice starts, if we find that somebody is ill, the first thing is obviously to alert everybody who was on that team, and then also anybody that was practicing in the building during their time slot, which essentially would be up to 7 other teams.
Right. Well, it's helpful to hear that whole perspective. I think there's a lot of good aspects of that, especially how you're engaging parents as part of that. Courtney, how are you, or actually I'm gonna go to Brendan first, because I think some of the cities you operate in are probably a little bit different than California. How are you thinking about the return to play on the court? What are the plans? What are you anticipating? How are you getting ready for that?
Yeah, we're also doing it in a phased approach. We just released our plans on Monday. We worked with them, with a medical professional who also happens to be a father of one of our players. So he was a really great guy to work with because he had the medical knowledge and the health and safety aspect of it. But he also approached it from the aspect of being a father who wanted his son to get back out there and get active and interact with his buddies and things like that. So it was a nice kind of push and pull. And that's a little bit how our plans are. So phase one, we're starting on Monday in most of our cities where we're allowed, and it's just small group training, 6 kids max, mostly outside, maybe some inside depending on where it is. And that will continue on for the foreseeable future until we think it's, first of all, we're allowed to, with the state and national and local guidelines, but also when we think it's safe to do so. And that would be phase 2 would be non-contact team practices, again, outside or inside. And then phase 3 is increased contact and maybe some inter squad scrimmages and things like that. And then phase 4 would be the full open, but there's no dates on any of those things. We are, I think compared to a lot of youth basketball organizations, we're a bit more on kind of the pessimistic, safe side of things, where we don't think that there's going to be a lot happening, or at least safely anytime soon. So we are trying to play it as safe as possible, but also we have heard from our parents, and a lot of them want to try to at least do a little something. And so that's what we're trying to do, just phase it in slowly but surely.
Yeah, but it does seem like you're anticipating, for the foreseeable future, very different kind of basketball, right? Much more skills oriented, small group oriented, practice oriented, as opposed to bigger format tournament plays or league play for the foreseeable future in the cities are in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know tournaments are going to happen because we get emails, we hear people talking, and but we're just not going to participate in them anytime soon. We're not going to, our kids aren't going to be like an experiment to see how it goes, right? We don't want that to happen. We don't want the kids and their families. So, but they are going to happen. We're just not going to participate until we believe it's safe and are advised that it is safe. So we'll phase it in slowly but surely, and it's going to be different everywhere. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments I think that have been asking just in terms of, until there's a vaccine, what does this look like? And, basically, I think if you look at the morning consult data, 50% of parents has a lot of questions about kids participating in sport until there is a vaccine. And certainly at least until over 60% until cases in your area decline. A lot of this is going to be based on individual parents. You can put your own guidelines out, you have your own approach, but I think, Brendan, as you were saying, it's how individual parents are going to embrace that is what is going to determine, how this comes back. Courtney, on that topic of parents, you mentioned, parents as customers here, kids as customers, and usually the adage is the customer is always right. But in youth sports, that's never been true, right? Like no one out here is basically telling me how the youth sports basketball parents are right when they tell you what to do and everything else. But it does seem like there's a notion of how you're collaborating with them as you think about return to play. So how are the Bulldogs thinking about their return to play plan? How do you think about involving parents in that process?
Well, we actually sent out a survey, so we're waiting to hear back from that. And a lot has transpired over the last couple of days in California, where now the governor is saying the guidelines are specific to your county. So if your county meets certain guidelines, you can accelerate through the phases. And we have a group called the San Diego Sports Coalition that was actually put together by the San Diego Board of Supervisors to kind of unite all of youth sports in San Diego so that we're all on the same page and we come up with a plan, and everybody will be consistent in their plans, and that will help all of us kind of collaborate and make sure that we have the same plan and everybody's sticking to that plan. Now, with that being said, the governor speaks today, and he just said Monday that it's based upon counties. Yesterday, the Board of Supervisors got a bill approved to kind of accelerate us into phase 3. So when we're going to start, I don't know. And it's just things are changing so quickly, it's hard to say. Now we are prepared, just like Brendan and Brandon, there's going to be phases of it. We do have we have a phased out plan similar to everybody else. It's smaller groups, staying on one half of the court, social distancing from each other. Coaches wear masks, trying to figure out how we're going to, take attendance properly so that just in case if we have someone get sick, we can do contact tracing, continue to follow the local health guidelines. So really we're doing the same thing. And parents, for us, parents are, we have the same where people are emailing us, asking us when is summer camp starting? So that would make you think that parents are ready to get back into it. But, we also have a lot of parents who haven't really said anything. And so the survey is going to be the big teller for us of what we can do moving forward and what parents feel really comfortable with. Because we do want to know what they're comfortable with. We do want to know how they feel. And I think the best option will be to offer on-court, in-person, socially distance options, and then have virtual options as well, so that everybody can still participate and they're going to do what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. One, first of all, there's some great resources on the chat tool with the return to play plans. We're also, one of the things you can see if you want to see return to play plans from other sports, other basketball organizations, that Slack group, which we'll share out, is another good resource for that. But one thing, Courtney, you mentioned is the engagement of parents, and I want to underscore that. So I just posted a blog post we shared this week, which is basically a questionnaire that you can use for parents and players to get that kind of feedback if you want any help in thinking about designing or what some good questions are to ask. But one of the best practices that we've seen is how do you co-create the return to play with your parents? Because if you're designing it with them, if you're getting their feedback on it, then one of the things that happens is it'll reduce the amount of refunds or disputes or things like that you're going to have, because they know they're going into it. They're shaping the very policy that you're pursuing. So I think that's one of the ways, and some parents are going to decide that may not be for them, but the more that you can be honest and transparent and inclusive of them in that process, it's one of the best ways, I think, to kind of push ahead. Brandon, one of the other questions that comes out a lot about is liability, right? And ultimately, how do you think about waivers? How do you think about insurance? So how are you navigating that as probably one of the, in an area which is the closest to return?
Yeah, we've, we have a general liability waiver that everybody's always signed, whether it's an event operator coming into the building that, that assumes liability for what they're doing and their customer base. And then obviously our players in our own programs and our camps sign one as well. We've added one that is specific to COVID. And to basically, that people are taking a risk going into an indoor facility. We're following the guidelines that the government has put forth. We're a business that has to open to survive. But we've made it very clear to people that if you're concerned about getting germs passed to you, maybe a sports return isn't right for you just yet. And again, like I said before, and that's totally okay. We've tried to be really respectful to those situations, but I think a COVID waiver is important right now until there's some kind of legislation that basically protects businesses from, someone suing us in the event that someone were to pick it up inside. I think it's needed. And we've put that out to our families in the last 48 hours, and we've had no pushback from people that were planning to return and now won't, because of that. So
that's awesome. One of the questions also specific to basketball is recruiting, right? And I think there's questions, Brandon, on live periods being moved, and ultimately, what does recruiting look like? And especially someone who's dealing with a lot of elite players, and I'm sure you and Courtney both have that perspective. What's the implication of that, and how do you think about recruiting in an environment like this?
Yeah, recruiting's difficult, but there is some things that players can take advantage of while they're at home. I mean, of course, you have the videos, and they should be contacting schools and different things like that. But yeah, with the live periods being changed, it's really, it's kind of and they might not even happen. So I feel really bad actually for the 2021 kids, because they got hurt last year with the NCAA moving all the stuff around and doing that. And now this year with this happening, so it's going to be hard for them. But coaches also are in the same boat. Like, they don't have anywhere to go or anywhere to be except at home. So they're more willing to watch game film and read emails and take a chance on kids reaching out to them. So I would just suggest, while you're at home, I mean, the high school kids, the kids that want to be recruited, want to play in college, first of all, you have to be doing something. You have to be working out, staying in shape, working on your skills, whatever you can do there. but then also take some time to research schools, to email college coaches, to make your game film, your highlight film, send that stuff out and be super proactive about it. And there's really been no better time to be proactive about it than right now, because, you know, you cannot control what the NCAA does or doesn't do with the live periods. So that's kind of out of our control. And so right now, the only thing that's in their control is working out on their own and then being proactive about, you know, contacting college coaches.
Courtney, what do you see your role as an organization in helping you know, some of your top players navigate the recruiting question, and how are you approaching it?
Well, you know, I think with the recruiting part, understanding that these viewing periods are the most important time for juniors, right? For me, I'm trying to, you know, the younger kids, you just let them know, hey, it's unfortunate that you're not going to be able to play this season, but at least you get next year. So get yourself ready to be an elite player next summer. And obviously throughout the year, they're also going to get opportunities to get exposure to colleges. For the juniors, I've encouraged them to get creative with the way that they contact college coaches. Now, being able to teach kids how to evaluate film has given them insight that a lot of players may not have. And so I've encouraged players to get creative. When you go through your highlights, maybe show college coaches a couple mistakes you made and explain how you're going to improve that weakness of yours through this time during COVID. Or send them your film evaluation of yourself. Let them know where you rate yourself in these areas, what they can look for in these areas, and the areas that you need to be stronger. And then identify within their system how you fit in their system, how your strengths fit the strengths of their systems, and how your weaknesses are going to be improved during this time and over the next year until you have the opportunity to play with them. Just getting creative about it, being very flexible in your mind about, because they can't see you and because highlight films are only good plays, let them know, I understand I'm not perfect, but I also understand what I need to fix, and that's an advantage that I have because now I can move forward in correcting those weaknesses and improving them.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point. And I think the other thing, it's interesting to also think about what digital tools can help support recruiting. I know our LeagueApps, we integrate with a few different tools, and I think there are going to be some permanent shifts. If kids start to get better at doing this, or they're engaging coaches differently, that might create new kinds of opportunities, the way to think about recruiting moving forward. Brandon, you know, one of the questions I think a lot of people are wondering is, you know, some of the best practice you see, especially as a facility, it's one thing to have your own practices, your own games. What happens when people are bringing other folks into a facility, or the people out there renting a facility? How do you think about where that liability lives, and what advice do you have for organizations that are coming to rent a facility, and what they should be looking for or asking for in that relationship?
Great question, and something that we've gone back and forth on. You know, the Pacers Athletic Center, I would say about 80% of our business outside of the events are homegrown. So we communicate with those people daily. It's easy for us to obviously bring our own people in. We have a volleyball partner here at the PAC that, you know, they spend a lot of money with us. They're a great customer. And they bring at most of the year, they're using 4 courts for rental time. And because of all this and only being able to bring in 100 people at a time, you know, everybody's kind of had to work together to shift around their expectations of what we can do. In regards to the liability piece, we've essentially had their entire customer base is going to have to fill out the same waivers that ours would. Anybody coming in the building is going to have to understand that, you know, the business has to protect itself. And so that's what we're doing for this first phase. And then we're going to go from there. But I think that it's incredibly important, if you are the facility, to protect yourself in every way possible, and the team businesses. I mean, for all of us in this business, we are dealing with people's most prized possessions, which are their children. And, you know, we have to protect them, and then we have to protect ourselves, obviously. And in today's world, we know what can happen if we don't. So we're being as cautious as we can in every step of the way, even to the point where, at least at the PAC for now, we are letting in no outside groups. I mean, the amount of phone calls I've had once Indiana announced that we could open up, the schools are all closed. So there are a lot of businesses or a lot of companies like a Primetime or even a Pro Skills that are used to using maybe a church or a school gym, and those are all closed until July. So we've had tons of people reach out. Can we rent a court, please? Can this semi-pro come in and work out? And, we've just had to say no. I mean, we've had to say no. We've made sure that this first wave, we're only gonna use the customer base that we've communicated with and that we know on a very personal level before we let anyone else in.
Very thoughtful. Brendan, last question. What is a virtual camp? And a lot of people are wondering how you keep kids engaged. So I know you're doing virtual shooting, virtual horse. So give us the last word about what that is.
Yeah, I mean, we're just going to use Zoom, but there's some cool things, you can do in Zoom with like private rooms and things like that. So we'll be doing stations, breaking kids up into rooms and dribbling kind of room, footwork room, strength conditioning, whatever. And we don't need a hoop. We'll break kids up into kids that have a hoop and those that don't, and we'll do different competitions for both. But I think a big piece of what's missing in a lot of the conversations is kind of the mental health of kids and the desire for them to engage with other kids and socialize. So that'll be a big part of the camp too. Like, hey, let's just talk. Let's have trivia. Let's do some fun things. It's not just going to be like dribble, shoot, jab, whatever. It's going to be, there's going to be some social aspects to it as well. It's only going to be 2 hours a day. So it's not like a normal 6 hour long camp. So it's going to be fun. We're really looking forward to it. And I think it's just going to be a kind of a mini version of our normal day camps. And again, just through Zoom. So we're really excited about them.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank this incredible panel for all the incredible insights. One of the things I'll encourage people to do is check out the Slack group. I know Brendan is champion Slack, especially the Junior NBA Flagship Network. But there's a free group that people can be part of that, again, we shared information on, and it's a great place to get access to other people's waivers and return to play plans and ideas of what's going on. So that's open to everybody. Junior NBA also has incredible resources. They just ran a great conference that Brendan became famous because of. If you go to the Junior NBA's YouTube channel, you can see that conference in its entirety. There's some really great speakers besides Brendan that you can learn from and hear from. Exactly. You and Steph Curry kind of headlined it. So it's encourage you to take advantage of a lot of their resources. And then, again, and I just can't thank you all enough, Courtney, for all the great work you're doing in California, and Brendan for kind of leading the return to play in Indiana, and Brendan for kind of the national footprint that you're operating at Pro Skills. Thanks for inspiring us and providing a lot of great ideas here, and certainly wishing everyone a safe return and appreciate everyone being with us. So with that, I'll sign off. This is the Next Up Town Hall focused on basketball, and excited to get back out there playing again. So have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, everyone.